Well, of course, we didn't support the extension to 2029 under the previous Tory UK government of the energy profits levy, nor...
Let's hear the Cabinet Secretary.
I'm not sure they quite heard that, Presiding Officer, so let me say again, we didn't support either the extension to 2029 under the previous Tory UK government, nor the further extension to 2030 and the increase in rate confirmed at last year's UK autumn budget. This is having a devastating effect on the sector in the north east of Scotland and in the rest of Scotland, and it needs to be scrapped, and it needs to be scrapped now.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and I call Russell Finlay at question number 1.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Less than 3 months ago, my party asked Parliament to instigate a Scottish grooming gangs inquiry. We did so because we knew that it was necessary. We knew it then, and we certainly know it now. Our amendment to the Victims' Bill was the only legal mechanism available to us. However, the SNP voted it down. And in doing so, the Justice Secretary cited the leading expert, Professor Alexis Jay. Angela Constance said that Professor Jay, and I quote, shares my view and has put on the record and stated to the media that she does not support further inquiries into child sexual abuse and exploitation. Does John Swinney think that the Justice Secretary's statement was honest?
First Minister.
Yes, I do. I think it was a reflection. I think it was a reflection of the general comment that was being made about the issues at the time. But of course, as Mr Finlay knows, the government was looking at a whole range of different issues in relation to the examination of the issue of childhood sexual abuse, which of course builds on the work that we have undertaken already in establishing the inquiry into these issues that is chaired by Lady Smith. And of course, in the debate yesterday, the government set out further steps that we are taking, and I welcome very much the participation of Professor Alexis Jay in the work that the government is taking forward.
Russell Finlay.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. At no point did Professor Jay say there should be no further inquiries into grooming gangs in Scotland. The Justice Secretary misrepresented Professor Jay, she misled the Parliament and she misled the public. And then she went AWOL. On November 19, she wasn't here to answer urgent questions about her misrepresentation. On November 25th, she put up a junior minister to answer urgent questions on the lack of knowledge about grooming gangs in Scotland. On November 26th, she again sat here in silence when we challenged her failure to answer questions. Yesterday, the Justice Secretary finally broke her silence, but she made no apology and didn't accept any wrongdoing whatsoever. The misleading of Parliament must be investigated by the independent advisers to the Ministerial Code. Will John Swinney support an investigation, and if it finds against the Justice Secretary, will he sack her?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I am satisfied with the way in which these matters have been conducted, and what I am also satisfied by is the steps that the government set out yesterday to Parliament, which is that there will be an independent national review of the response to group-based child sexual abuse and exploitation in Scotland, led by the Care Inspectorate, His Majesty's Inspector of Education, His Majesty's Inspector at Constabulary and Health Improvement Scotland. I welcome the fact that Professor Alexis Jay has been appointed the independent chair for the National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group, and all of that work will be drawn together, assessed independently, and further advice will come to ministers and Parliament will be updated.
Russell Finlay.
Well, John Swinney says he's satisfied, but victims have no faith in this government and no faith in this Justice Secretary. The mother of Taylor, who was gang raped as a child in care, told me that there is, quote, no substance to anything that Angela Constance says, and that, and I quote, she cannot oversee anything. And I wonder if perhaps the First Minister has concluded the same thing in private. Yesterday's announcement of a grooming gangs review was announced not by the Justice Secretary, but by the Education Secretary. It looks like the responsibility for this inquiry and the decision-makings on its findings will not be Angela Constance. So has John Swinney also realised that she cannot possibly oversee this review? And does that not show that he's also lost confidence in his own Justice Secretary?
First Minister.
No, that is not the case. And the reason why the Education Secretary made the announcements yesterday is the Education Secretary carries Cabinet responsibility for child protection issues, in which all of this material is comprised. Yes. And the Cabinet Secretary for Education led the discussion at Cabinet on Tuesday, which involved all Cabinet colleagues, including the Justice Secretary, about the steps the Government was taking, which I set out to Parliament last week in response to Pam Gosal the Government was taking forward. So all of this is the responsibility of the Government, led by the Cabinet Secretary for Education, and I've set out to Parliament the steps that we're taking.
Russell Finlay.
So it sounds like the Justice Secretary will not have responsibility for review into mass organised criminality, but the First Minister suggests there's nothing
Let's hear Mr.
unusual
Finlay.
about that. The SNP have been shamed into launching a grooming gangs review. But it's a review that victims believe will see public bodies mark their own homework and the Government control the findings. A review which we still don't fully know whether the Justice Secretary, who didn't want it to happen, who dishonestly twisted the words of an academic and who misled victims and the Parliament, might or might not be in charge of. All of this is why a review simply isn't good enough and that an independent inquiry is necessary. Victims don't trust Angela Constance, they don't trust the SNP or the authorities who have already failed them. They deserve answers, they deserve justice, and that can only be achieved by a free, fearless and independent inquiry. So why on earth can't John Swinney see this?
First Minister.
President, I recognise the significance and the seriousness of this issue, and it's been treated so within my government, which is why we have taken the careful steps to ensure that we do all of the explanatory work and investigative work to ensure that we come to the right conclusion about whether an inquiry of the nature that Mr Finlay put to Parliament yesterday is appropriate and necessary. Mr Finlay said that this is a whole collection of different organisations marking their own homework. The organisations I referred to are set up by statute that have to operate independently of government. That is what the law requires of them. And they are the Care Inspectorate, His Majesty's Inspectorate of Education, His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Health Improvement Scotland. And I think it's really important that I, as First Minister, make clear openly to the public in Scotland that I have absolute confidence in the independent decision-making and scrutiny of these organisations, because it is vital for public confidence. We've seen in recent weeks reports from Healthcare Improvement Scotland which have been very, very critical and challenging to health boards in this country. That is because they are exercising independent and fearless scrutiny, as will Professor Alexis Jay as the independent chair of the National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group. And that gives me confidence that we are going about this process in a serious and detailed fashion to make sure that the perspective of victims is properly addressed as we consider this significant and serious issue.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, Audit Scotland has today published yet another damning report into the SNP's mismanagement of our NHS. It is grim reading for John Swinney, but more devastating for the patients and the staff. It found that despite more money and more staff, NHS Scotland's performance has not improved in line with commitments made by the Scottish Government. It says that NHS boards are struggling to break even, with 7 requiring government loans, and it exposes the implementation gap between SNP announcements and the reality for patients. Isn't it a damning indictment on John Swinney that, despite his promises, long waits persist and that in his hands the NHS is, in Audit Scotland's words, unsustainable? First Minister.
Anybody observing these exchanges at First Minister's questions will understand that I'm the first to accept that there are challenges in ensuring the NHS recovers from the disruption of 2 years of the COVID pandemic. And we're now in a situation where, for example, so I accept that challenge exists, but there is also significant progress being made. So, for example, the number of planned and performed operations in Scotland represents the highest levels since before the pandemic, since January 2020. In the 12 months to October 2025, there were 297,014 operations planned, a 4.5% increase from the previous 12 months, and while 271,328 operations were performed, and an increase of 4.6%. So what that demonstrates is that while there are challenges, there has progress been made, and the plans that I have put in place to focus on long waits are now beginning to have effect.
Presiding Officer, the NHS needs to recover from John Swinney and the SNP. That's the problem we've got across the country. Now, his predecessor promised to end waits of over a year by September 2024. He failed. John Swinney has promised to end waits of over a year by March 2026, but right now, more than 11,000 patients are waiting over 2 years. So what's the result? Figures published this week show a record number of patients are being forced to go private, with 13,455 private admissions between April and June this year. People in pain being forced to remortgage their homes and spend life savings to get their treatment they need. The founding principles of our NHS, free and available at the point of need, is being destroyed by the SNP. So why is John Swinney doing what even Margaret Thatcher failed to do, and that's privatise healthcare in Scotland?
First Minister.
It's interesting that Mr Sarwar has shifted the ground of his argument on private treatment, because some months ago Mr Sarwar put a figure to me which was of a much more significant accusation of the amount of private treatment that was underway. I can't remember exactly the proportion, but it was of the order of something like 1 in 6 of the population, which was absolutely a ludicrously nonsensical figure. So Mr Sarwar has changed his ground. Now let me give Mr Sarwar some reassurance about what's happening about long waits, because between April and October
Let's hear one another.
Between April and October this year, new outpatient waits for over a year reduced by 17.9% just since April. In the same period, the waiting list size for new inpatient and day case procedures over 52 weeks has reduced by 26.1%. So let me say to Mr Sarwar, I accept there are challenges in the National Health Service as a consequence of the COVID pandemic, but this government is delivering on the progress that I said would be made.
Anna Sarwar.
I think with that rambling response from the First Minister, he needs some time off and a wee rest, I think, because SNP-run Scotland was the only UK nation that saw an increase in private admissions during the period I quoted. The truth is that Scots are paying the price for John Swinney's incompetence. Thousands forced to go private to get the treatment they need, remortgaging homes or borrowing money to pay £15,000 for a knee replacement, over £14,000 for a hip replacement, £3,000 for cataract surgery. That means Scots have been forced to pay at least £59 million of their own money on top of their taxes for cataracts and hip and knee replacements in the last year alone, breaching the founding principles of our NHS, healthcare free and available at the point of need, not on the ability to pay. But for those who can't raise the money, they are left to wait in pain and anxiety. So why is John Swinney forcing Scots in need to choose between paying the financial cost or the human cost of his incompetence and failure?
First Minister.
I simply remind Mr Sarwar that our National Health Service was disrupted for a period of 2 years because of COVID, and there is a backlog in treatment, and we are working hard to ensure that we reduce that backlog. Now, to reassure Mr Sarwar, the number of hip and knee operations reached an all-time high in 2024, and as I've just recounted, we are performing more operations in the National Health Service now, and we are now back to levels where we're performing at a level pre-pandemic, which is an indication of the effectiveness of the reforms that I've put in place and the plans that are delivering for people in Scotland. And on that basis, this government is absolutely focused on making sure that the National Health Service meets the needs of people in Scotland as we recover from COVID and deliver on the expectations of the people of our country.
Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sorry to say, but the First Minister's head is completely in the sand about the crisis in our NHS. Everybody knows somebody who's been let down. And Nassar rightly talks about the human cost. Let me tell him what that human cost looks like. Isabel and Martin Knights were travelling down the dual carriageway near Aberdeen when Isabel had a violent seizure and stopped breathing. With nowhere to pull over, Martin had to use every ounce of his police training to get her heart going again while the car was still moving, screeching to a halt at the front door of A&E and explaining to staff everything that had happened. However, after moving their car, Martin wasn't allowed to return to Isabel's side. A&E was just too busy. She was left alone in a corridor for 6 hours. Remember, her heart had only just been restarted. When she was eventually seen by a doctor, it was obvious that crucial information had been overlooked. So can I ask the First Minister, if you can turn up at accident emergency, having stopped breathing for minutes, and not be seen for hours, what does that say about the state of our NHS?
First Minister.
Well, first of all, President Officer, I'm very sorry to hear the details of the experience of Isabel and Martin Knights. I'm happy to explore the exact circumstances of the case that Mr Cole-Hamilton puts to me, but the purpose and the focus of accident and emergency is to provide the immediate intervention for those in the gravest of conditions, and that would be my expectation that that should happen in all circumstances.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Presiding Officer, Martin and Isabel are absolutely clear. They are not having a go at hard-working staff who looked exhausted that day in A&E. Emergency departments are backed up because hospitals are rammed, because there are so many people stuck there who should be in care homes or looked after at home. That's what the Auditor General told us this morning. Let's put this into perspective. When the SNP first came to power, in a single month, only a handful of people ever waited more than 12 hours in accident and emergency. It hardly ever happened. Despite the best efforts of staff, that figure has increased by 63,000%. So can I ask the First Minister, doesn't Isabel and Martin's experience show how mistakes can be made, patients can be put in danger because accident and emergency is overwhelmed on the SNP's watch?
First Minister.
There will be a range of different factors that affect the circumstances in any accident and emergency department at any given time. Some of it will be about whole system challenges such as delayed discharge, where hospitals are so congested that it's difficult to ensure that patients can be transferred from A&E into routine wards on a timely basis. And obviously we work with local authority partnerships, and the Health Secretary is actively pursuing this on my behalf this week to ensure that we reduce further the delayed discharge position to support accident and emergency. The second issue is obviously the caseload that presents at A&E, and in that respect we have taken forward work to put in place frailty units which enable us to support frail patients more actively and in a more supportive environment than the mainstream of A&E, where there can be some very acute and challenging circumstances. And the third factor is obviously the prevalence of individual health conditions. And as members of Parliament will know, we are seeing an early and significant upsurge in the prevalence of flu, which is resulting in very significant presentations at our hospitals. Indeed, in the last 2 weeks, we have had an increase of 70% in flu admissions to hospital as a consequence of the gravity of the conditions, despite the very high performance on flu vaccinations that are underway in our society. So, what I would say to Mr Cole-Hamilton is the Government is taking forward a range of different interventions to ensure that we are working to reduce demand within A&E services so that individuals like Isabel and Martin Knights can be supported in the way that I would expect them to be so.
Question number 4, Paul McLennan.
To ask the First Minister whether he will provide an update on the Scottish Government's latest engagement with the UK Government regarding any impact on poverty levels in Scotland of the freeze to local housing allowance.
First Minister.
So it's disappointing that the UK budget contained no commitment to end the freeze on local housing allowance. Next year will be the second year of the freeze, and it will be 3 years since the local housing allowance was last uprated. The Resolution Foundation has warned that next year the gap between real-world rents and housing support will be the biggest on record.
Paul McLennan.
Can I thank the First Minister for that answer? The Chancellor spoke about tackling child poverty, yet she failed to restore local housing allowance rates. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation estimated that 20,000 private renters, including 10,000 children, will be pushed into poverty in 25-26 as a direct result of this policy. Meanwhile, the Resolution Foundation predicts that the affordability gap, which is currently bigger than when the Conservative government increased local housing allowance in 2020, will rise to 25% by 29-30 unless the UK government intervenes. This amounts to £180 a month for hard-pressed families. While Labour continues to make lives harder for the most vulnerable, can the First Minister tell us more about the steps the Scottish Government is taking across housing to further its ambition of eradicating child poverty?
First Minister.
Sir, the warnings from the Resolution Foundation are indeed deeply troubling. The Scottish Government is investing over £100 million in discretionary housing payments this year to offset UK Government welfare cuts. £2 million of this, announced by the Cabinet Secretary for Housing, will help families in temporary accommodation secure homes in the private rented sector. This is part of our mission to eradicate child poverty. And on the question of the local housing allowances, the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice has been calling for an end to the freeze as part of the UK child poverty strategy, a move that would help to lift more families out of poverty.
Question number 5, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what funding is in place to ensure that the A9 dualling project is completed by the target date of 2035.
First Minister.
So the Government remains committed to completing the dualling programme by the end of 2035, and the necessary funding will be in place to do so.
Murdo Fraser.
I thank the First Minister for his response. This week, the Scotsman newspaper reported that ministers were expected to reject private funding under the mutual investment model, which had been planned for further sections of the A9 dualling project, even though this has been utilised for 2 sections which are progressing. And this raises real concerns about whether this vital scheme can now progress, given the constraints on capital funding in the Scottish Government's budget. A9 dualling has already been delayed 10 years from the original planned completion date of 2025, and any further delays will cost more lives needlessly. Just on Tuesday evening, we saw another serious accident at Rallia, leaving 1 passenger in a critical condition in hospital and the road closed for hours. So what guarantee can the First Minister give us that there will be no more delays delivering this vital project?
First Minister.
Sir, I was very sorry to hear about the incident on Tuesday evening at Rallia, and I express my good wishes to the individual who I understand is in a critical condition as a consequence, and we obviously hope for their full recovery. As I said in my earlier answer, the Government remains committed to completing the dualling programme by the end of 2035, and the necessary funding will be in place to do so.
Rhoda Grant.
Can I ask the First Minister if he would commit to introducing a duty of candour for the A9 project, as recommended by the Petitions Committee, to ensure that the Parliament and the public are fully informed about progress, delays and financial challenges in real time?
First Minister.
Well, the Government responded to that request by indicating it would report regularly to Parliament, and that's exactly what the Government will do.
Question number 6, Stuart McMillan.
Can I also ask the First Minister whether he will provide an update on whether the Scottish Government will instigate a direct award to Ferguson Marine for the replacement of the MV Lord of the Isles?
First Minister.
So the procurement for the replacement for the MV Lord of the Isles engages complex legal and subsidy control issues. Any decision must take into account the responsibility we have towards securing the best outcomes for our island communities and businesses. We are currently considering the business case and next steps in relation to the MV Lord of the Isles replacement, and will confirm these in due course.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank the First Minister for that reply. And the presence of the Ferguson Marine and its workforce is important to my constituency. The only way the presence can continue is by ensuring the yard has a strong order book. And it's up to the new interim chair and management team to make the yard efficient and effective to win new orders, in addition to being supported by the Scottish Government in these endeavours. And I am very much aware of the arguments about why the direct award is extremely challenging. However, I'm also conscious of the level of investment the Scottish Government have already invested in the yard will be lost for good if the yard does not have an order book. So will the First Minister commit to a direct award of the replacement for the Lord of the Isles, one that could lead to securing further work if the board and management succeed to keep Ferguson Marine firmly rooted, creating employment and building ships in Port Glasgow?
First Minister.
I'm very supportive of securing a future for the Ferguson Marine Yard. It is a yard that I worked very hard over 10 years ago to ensure survived the difficulties that it faced, and the Government has obviously given sustained support over many years. As I indicated in my earlier answer, the issues around about the MV Lord of the Isles direct award are complex. They involve significant issues around subsidy control that the Government cannot in any way, shape or form ignore. But I do give Mr McMillan the assurance that the Government is absolutely committed to working with Ferguson Marine to secure its future.
Thank you. Sue Webber.
Ferguson Marine's future depends on independently securing work both within the UK and overseas. This is an SNP government-owned yard, so what action is the First Minister taking to ensure that the yard is competitive, restores its reputation for delivering projects on time and under budget, and can procure its own work rather than relying on a direct award?
First Minister.
That's part of us ensuring that the yard has leadership in place and a workforce in place to support its direction, which is able to attract orders and can operate competitively on international markets. That's what government support for the yard is all about, and it will be the focus of our interventions to make sure that remains the case.
Katie Clark.
There is a strong economic and social case for a direct award to the yard, and I urge the First Minister to support such an award. A decision of this contract has been delayed for far too long, and the workforce deserve clarity. So can he undertake to ensure that there is a speedy decision? If the First Minister cannot commit to a direct award of this contract today, will he commit today to supporting Ferguson's through other avenues, such as the second round of the Small Vessels Replacement Programme, and delivering the promised £14.2 million investment in full?
First Minister.
In relation to, as I've indicated in my earlier answers, and I think Katie Clark will appreciate these points, there are complex issues of a legal nature in relation to subsidy control that the Government just simply cannot ignore. And I'm enormously sympathetic and supportive of a future for the yard. That's why the Government has committed investment to support the yard, which will be available to the yard at the moments in which it is appropriate for that to be deployed. And we are obviously open to working with the yard to strengthening its competitive position to enable it to win vessel contracts and to be able to take those forward on an ongoing basis. And that remains the focus of the Government's intervention on this issue.
Alistair Allen.
Does the First Minister agree that whatever solution is found to the tender in question, it must be a decision informed by the views of people in Uist and other island communities who clearly want to see new vessels in service as soon as feasible?
First Minister.
I understand that point and support it. Obviously, it was under this Government that the connection between Mallig and Loch Boisdale was established, which is the route that the MV Lord of the Isles primarily operates. I know how important that connection is to the constituents of Dr Allen and South Uist and surrounding communities, and it's important that we reflect on the necessity for sustained connections for all island communities, and that lies at the heart of the Government's strategy in relation to the Clyde and Hebrides ferry services.
Thank you. We move to general and constituency supplementaries, and I call Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Residents of Bothwell in my region have been left shaken by the spate of targeted firebombing attacks on restaurants within the area. 4 premises have been targeted by arson attacks over the last 6 years, with 2 taking place in September. Those living in Bothwell have expressed fear and frustration, with one individual saying it feels like it's becoming a no-go area socially. There are now empty plots where restaurants once stood. Jobs have been lost and families have been impacted by recent events. Bothwell residents deserve answers, but they also deserve reassurance. So what reassurance can the First Minister give to my constituents that these events are being taken seriously by Police Scotland? And will he ask for the relevant Minister to make inquiries to ensure that all information that can be made public is being circulated within the community?
First Minister.
I'm obviously aware of these issues and concerned by them. I would reassure Megan Gallagher and her constituents that all cases that are presented to Police Scotland are taken seriously. That will be the case in relation to these examples, and obviously there's patently obvious there's criminal behaviour involved here, so there will be the need for that information to be handled within the criminal justice system to ensure that those responsible can be prosecuted for the acts that they are taking forward. So with that caveat, I'm very happy to advise that the Justice Secretary will raise this issue with the Chief Constable, but the amount of information that can be available will be constrained by the necessity of protecting that information to support criminal prosecutions, which there should be in the cases of the behaviour that Megan Gallagher has put to me today.
Aaron Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The UK Government promised to end the dither and delay and committed £200 million to the Acorn project in June, yet months on, not a single penny has reached the developers, and now a project partner is seeking to sell its stake. After failing to intervene at Grangemouth and Mossmoran, and after retaining an energy profits levy throttling investment, if the UK Government failed to act on Acorn, it will be clear that they have abandoned Scottish industry. So does the First Minister agree that if a private buyer cannot be found for the stake, GB Energy must step in to ensure this project does go ahead, particularly in light of them setting their 5-year project today?
First Minister.
President, I've been very clear to Parliament my support over a long period of time for the Acorn project. Indeed, is an issue that I raised frequently with the previous Conservative United Kingdom Government to seek progress upon, and it's also an issue that I've raised with the current United Kingdom Government to seek progress on. Obviously, in relation to the discussions involving the Storega within the Acorn project, the Deputy First Minister has been involved in dialogue with the United Kingdom Government on that question, and I think this is a significant project that is a key to the just transition and to the economic opportunities of the North East of Scotland, and the Scottish Government will do all that we can to support its development. I would also make the point that the presence of the energy profits levy is a significant inhibitor in all of our actions, and I would call on the United Kingdom Government, as I will do when I see the Prime Minister tomorrow, to remove the energy profits levy because of the damage it's doing to the North East of Scotland and the future of the Scottish economy.
Thank you. Mercedes Villalba.
Last week, fossil fuel giant Shell UK were fined over £500,000 after pleading guilty to 2 offences following an HSE investigation into its Brent Charlie platform. This was a potentially catastrophic incident that put the lives of over 175 offshore workers at risk due to negligence and penny pinching by Shell. Does the First Minister agree with me that such behaviour from Shell is wholly unacceptable and that offshore worker health and safety must be paramount to our energy transition if it is to be in any way just?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, on all occasions, the welfare and the safety of workforces must be paramount in any industrial activity in our country. That's why the Health and Safety Executive, which is of course a reserved agency, exercises its responsibilities, and why I support strongly the work of the Health and Safety Executive to ensure the very aspirations that Mercedes Villalba puts to me are reflected in the working practices in all circumstances, and particularly in the acutely serious context of offshore platforms. So I very much welcome the role of the HSE in protecting the safety of workers.
Michelle Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week, the UK Chancellor increased duty on Scotch whisky. This has heaped pressure on this vital sector, the jobs within it, including in my own constituency. But another bigger issue is US tariffs, and the First Minister has already pressed the case all the way to the Oval Office. But will he now exert pressure on the UK Government to stand up for Scotland and press for a deal in this vitally important industry?
First Minister.
Well, I'm very keen to make sure there is a deal arrived at on whisky tariffs. As Parliament will know, I've put significant effort into trying to ensure this case is made directly to the President of the United States. But as Parliament also knows, trade deals cannot be negotiated by the Scottish Government. They have to be negotiated by the United Kingdom Government. So I am waiting with expectation for the United Kingdom Government doing what they should have been doing all along, which is giving a priority to Scotch whisky and making sure we're exempt from tariffs with the United States. We're waiting for the United Kingdom to deliver the action that we all expect them to deliver.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last Friday, the UK National Screening Committee decided not to recommend a national screening programme for prostate cancer. The very next day, listeners to Off the Ball heard Kenny McIntyre speak very candidly about his own diagnosis with prostate cancer. Kenny was getting regular tests because of a family history of the disease, and he said this: "I'm very lucky to have caught this early, and I believe that is only because I pushed for regular testing. I had absolutely no symptoms and all examination indicated things were normal. Had it not been for regular checks which revealed the rising trend in my PSA levels, things may have been very different." We're lucky that we have men like Kenny McIntyre, Sir Chris Hoy and others who are speaking about their own experience, raising awareness and encouraging men to come forward and get checked. But prostate cancer is still killing 1,000 men in Scotland every year. So can I ask the First Minister for his response to the National Screening Committee's recommendation? And does he agree with me that if we do not have a national programme, we should at the very least be encouraging as many men as possible to come forward and get tested, make those tests as easily available as possible, because they will literally save lives?
First Minister.
President Officer, I very much associate myself with the comments that Douglas Ross has made. Mr Ross will be aware that the Government relies on the advice from the UK National Screening Committee, as do governments across the United Kingdom, and that is dispassionate advice that is gathered by the Screening Committee and shared with us. And Mr Ross will appreciate that although many of us will be enormously sympathetic to the point of view he has put forward, when we receive formal advice we have to have good reason to depart from that advice. I chaired a discussion in Butte House a few weeks ago at the request of Sir Chris Hoy, which drew together a range of different experts on prostate cancer, in which I wanted to challenge whether or not there was more that could be done to expand the approach to screening, which was very much the request of Sir Chris Hoy, and I obviously heard that very strongly from the contribution of Kenny McIntyre at the weekend. So we've asked the Chief Medical Officer in Scotland to take forward further scrutiny and consideration of this issue, and ministers in the Scottish Government were very open to looking afresh at these questions. So there will be further updates that we can share with Parliament in due course. But the point that I do reinforce of what Mr Ross has put to me today is that I would encourage any man who is concerned about these issues to pursue any testing that they think is necessary, given the fact that we all know that earlier such circumstances are identified, the better the outcomes are likely to be. So I welcome the contribution Mr Ross has made and assure him of the focused intervention of the Government to try to address this issue.
Jackie Bailey.
The First Minister will be aware of Turning Point Scotland, a major voluntary sector provider of drug and alcohol services. The charity is facing an existential funding crisis after being billed £800,000 by City Property Glasgow Investments, an arm's-length organisation of Glasgow City Council. This bill for repairs following the closure of the outstanding 218 Women's Justice Service is £600,000 more than estimated by an independent surveyor. This poses a very real risk to all Turning Point services in Glasgow. The Council's not responding, neither is the Board of City Property Glasgow Investments. So will the First Minister agree to meet with Turning Point, and I know he thinks they are a valuable organisation, and will he help to resolve the situation to ensure the continuing provision of Turning Point's drug and alcohol services in Glasgow?
First Minister.
I acknowledge the importance of the services that are provided by Turning Point Glasgow. This is obviously a local matter for Glasgow City Council. I will inquire as to the situation that is pertaining here, and identify with the Drugs and Alcohol Minister, Marie Todd, if there is any action the Government can take. Obviously, I don't know, I'm not familiar with all of the transactions here, but we will look into this and see what action is possible to be taken.
Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, Scotland is now the only UK nation that is seeing a reduction in deaths by suicide. Frontline organisations credit early intervention and strong partnership working. This is something I see in my community action network that I facilitate in Motherwell and Wishaw. So how will the Government promote best practice and ensure that suicide rates continue to fall in Scotland?
First Minister.
We must be very active as a government and as a society to do all that we can to prevent suicide in our society. We have been working in partnership with the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities on the strategy Creating Hope Together, which is delivered through Suicide Prevention Scotland, and it's focused on tackling the prevalence of suicide and the inequalities which so often lead to that. I can assure Claire Adamson the Government will continue that focus in the Suicide Prevention Action Plan for 2026 to 2029, which will be published early in the new year, to continue this important work.
Sandesh Gohani.
Thank you. Declaration of interest of practising NHS GP. William McLaughlin wrote to me telling me that he had to sit on an A&E trolley for 8 hours before he was admitted for a serious illness. And the Audit Scotland report has laid bare the abject failure of this SNP government, from hospitals crumbling to waiting lists crumbling. Everything the SNP touches seems to be crumbling. First Minister, stop the spin, stop reading selective stats, stop defending the indefensible and accept the full independent Audit Scotland report in full. So will the First Minister apologise to NHS staff, apologise to long waiting patients and apologise to William McLaughlin?
Always through the Chair. First Minister.
Sir, I'm very open with Parliament about the challenges that are experienced in the National Health Service, and I accept that for some individuals the treatment they receive takes longer to happen than should be the case, and that will cause distress. And to Mr McLaughlin and to anyone in such circumstances, I express my apology and my regret at that situation. But it is just not good enough for Sandesh Gohani to say the things that he said about the performance of our National Health Service, because the plan that I put in place, which is designed to tackle long waits, is working. It is delivering results. Between April and October this year, new outpatient waits over a year reduced by 17.9%, reductions for 5 consecutive months. In the same period, the waiting list size for new inpatient and day case procedures over 52 weeks has also reduced by 26.1%. GP numbers, which should be of some concern to Dr Gohani, are rising on my watch. So yes, there are challenges, but this government is delivering the solutions for the National Health Service in Scotland.
Patrick Harvey.
I know the First Minister is aware of the scale of the housing crisis in Glasgow, a crisis which has been exacerbated by UK changes to asylum policy, changes which are harming the lives of asylum seekers but also harmful to the budgets available for public services. So can the First Minister tell us, since his officials started meeting with the local authority, RSLs and others to discuss this situation, what urgent action has the Scottish Government taken to ensure that the Council, social landlords and others have the resources they need to deal with this crisis, which is not of their making?
First Minister.
The first thing that we've done is obviously press the Home Office to address these issues, because the Home Office is the root cause of the issues and difficulties that Mr Harvey raises in Parliament today, and we work collaboratively with Glasgow City Council in that respect. Some of the other steps that we've taken have been to increase the investment in housing, and particularly to increase the investment in ensuring that void accommodation is brought back into use. And in partnership with Glasgow City Council, we have been seeing much progress being made, and I commend Glasgow City Council for the work that they are taking forward, working obviously with registered social landlords in the process. And as a consequence of the support that we make available to the Council, particularly in relation to homelessness support, we are working as effectively as we can to tackle the significant issues that Mr Harvey raises.
Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the First Minister whether non-residential social care charges will be abolished by the Scottish Government before the end of the current parliamentary session, as was promised by his party's 2021 manifesto?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Government is working to address this issue. There are obviously a whole range of competing financial pressures that we have to address, and we are working in collaboration with partners to address these questions.
Keith Brown.
The First Minister will know that before the election last year, the Labour Party promised to widen devolution for Scotland and Wales. This week, 11 Labour members of the Welsh Senate wrote to the Prime Minister accusing the UK Government of rolling back on devolution promises. Whether it's the internal market or pride in place funding, their abysmal record in government shows their contempt for devolution. Indeed, Welsh members of the Assembly have described their own party's actions as a constitutional outrage.
Let's hear Mr Brown. Thank you.
Welsh Labour members have described their own party's actions as a constitutional outrage, showing at least a willingness to defend the devolution settlement, a willingness absent in the Labour Party in this chamber. Does the First Minister...
Members, let us hear Mr Brown. I know every member in the chamber would expect to be heard when they're putting a question.
They don't like freedom of speech, Presiding Officer. Does the First Minister share these concerns, and can he outline what dialogue the Scottish Government has had with the UK Government around devolution settlements, particularly in relation to the UK Internal Market Act and Pride in Place funding?
First Minister.
President Officer, I acknowledge the letter that's been sent by a number of members of the Senate to Labour members of the Senate to the Prime Minister, which expresses views which this Government would share about the unacceptability of the Internal Market Act, which is a product of the post-Brexit legislation of the Conservatives, which is undermining the powers of this Parliament in the way in which it is actively taking forward that issue. Now, of course, when the Internal Market Act was making its passage through the United Kingdom Parliament, the Labour Party in Scotland, and indeed the Labour Party in the House of Commons, was vigorously opposed to the Internal Market Act. So our reasonable expectation when the Labour Government was elected was that the Internal Market Act would be abolished and that we would have a restoration of the powers of this Parliament. Of course, as with so many other promises of the Labour Party, that was broken immediately after the election of the Labour Government. So there is just absolutely no confidence we can have that the Labour Government is going to fulfil its promises to protect devolution and abolish the Internal Market Act.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Jamie Hepburn, and there will now be a suspension to allow those leaving the public gallery and the chamber to do so.
Thank you.
Could I ask the members of the public who have been visiting their Parliament if, when leaving the chamber, they could please do so quickly and quietly, as we are now going to go into the next item of business. Thank you very much in advance for your cooperation. And the next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 19607 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on 70th anniversary of Cumbernauld as a new town. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Jamie Hepburn to open the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I begin by thanking the many members who have supported my motion to enable it to be debated this afternoon. I look forward to hearing from those who will contribute. Without picking any favourites, especially as I've not heard from anyone yet, I do look forward particularly to hearing from my friend and colleague Gordon MacDonald, who, before he went on pilgrimage to Edinburgh, grew up in Cumbernauld. Similarly, I also look forward to seeing who will be the first to use the "what's it called" refrain from a certain 1980s advertising campaign developed by the Cumbernauld Development Corporation to promote the town. I realise in mentioning it I have probably preempted and pipped everyone to the post in that regard. President Officer, it has been the best part of 13 years since I last brought a members' debate into the chamber. I'm delighted then that this first effort in over a decade is to mark an important milestone in the life of Cumbernauld, a town I'm not only proud to represent but proud to live in. But I do want to reflect I'm not the first SNP parliamentarian to represent Cumbernauld, and indeed part of the new town's story is that one of the first 11 of the SNP MPs elected in October 1974 was Maggie Bain, as she was then, and of course later to be Maggie Ewing, a much-loved representative for Eastern Bartonshire and, of course, a much-loved member of your family, President Officer. She is very fondly remembered by the SNP members of a certain vintage in Cumbernauld and is indeed still highly regarded by my constituents, and I thought it was important to place that on record. President Officer, on the topic of anniversaries, today's date also represents an important one for a Cumbernauld institution. It is 25 years to the day that the village gentry was opened, and I make mention of it because I thought the proprietor, Michael McPherson, might enjoy it, although in the interests of even-handedness I should make clear that there are other barbers available in the town. President Officer, there is much I could say about my hometown today, but of course time is limited, so I will only scratch the surface. But I want to begin by reminding members that Cumbernauld is, in fact, a long-standing settlement. A community has been established in the area for hundreds of centuries. Its name derived from the Gaelic Cumbernauld, the meeting place of the streams, those streams being the Bog Stank and the Red Burn. I could speak at length about the area's links to Roman times, to the Wars of Independence and to Mary Queen of Scots. I recognise probably every town in South and Central Scotland could speak to the links to Mary Queen of Scots. Certainly, Fiona Hislop could speak to the links to Mary Queen of Scots, but I lack the time. But I do want to say that I mentioned briefly that history, though, to place the 70th anniversary in its wider context. The new town is part of the wider history and the wider story of Cumbernauld, but there is no denying that it is as a new town that Cumbernauld is best known as. The 9th of December 1955 marks the date that Cumbernauld was designated as Scotland's third new town, following on from East Kilbride and Glenrothes. Our erstwhile colleague Andy Whiteman happened to notice this debate was happening, and he contacted me somewhat out of the blue to direct my attention to the biography of the late Scottish landscape architect Ian McHarg, who was dispatched to scope out Cumbernauld as a site for a new town. In it he wrote, "I spoke to several farmers whose opinions were united. It was a miserable place, wetter than most, with intractable mud, poor soil, a high water table, few trees, and those wind-pruned." Not the greatest endorsement for a location, but I am pleased to say that Mr McHarg's pessimism was misplaced. Since the first bricks were laid in the Kildrum area of the town in 1956, Cumbernauld has grown to be a thriving community of over 50,000 people, making it one of our country's larger settlements, with an abundance of green space, and despite what Mr McHarg said, plenty of trees. Those of us who live there are blessed with a wonderful environment in which to reside and enjoy. Presiding Officer, Cumbernauld status as Scotland's best new town, in my humble opinion, is underlined by the fact that, along with the Beatles' performance of All You Need Is Love featured as part of the first live multinational, multi-satellite television production, Our World, broadcast on the 25th of June 1967, featuring the dulcet tones of Magnus Magnusson speaking about the new town, no less. And everyone, of course, knows the town as the film location for the much-loved Bill Forsyth coming-of-age comedy Greggsgill, and today it's the location of Warpark Studio, where the series Outlander is produced. And, of course, we are home to AG Bar, the manufacturer of Scotland's other national drink. Cumbernauld, though, is not without its detractors. I often find that many of them have never even set foot in the town, let alone have any real knowledge of it. Much of this is predicated on the condition of our town centre. What was once a cutting-edge, state-of-the-art indoor shopping mall, the UK's first such indoor shopping mall, has suffered from decades of chronic underinvestment to the point of dilapidation. But a town is more than its centre, though, Presiding Officer. And Cumbernauld is blessed with an enormous sense of community spirit and an outstanding range of community organisations. Cumbernauld Poverty Action, who offer advice to residents on social security. Cumbernauld YMCA, who this year celebrated 65 years of operation. Cumbernauld and Carbrain Community Hub, who offer a range of different services to the community. Cumbernauld Action Care for the elderly, who support many of our oldest residents. Cumbernauld Environmental Society and Cumbernauld Living Landscapes project, both of whom do so much to maintain our green space. Cumbernauld FM, our own dedicated local radio station. Cumbernauld Theatre, who for 60 years have served as a cultural hub and whose future must be secured. Cumbernauld Kilsyth Care, who I should declare my wife helped form, who provide people who might require it with assistance in clothing their children. I could go on. There are many other such organisations, but those organisations and the people involved represent the real spirit of Cumbernauld. I'm glad that we are finally seeing steps to renovate the town centre and ensure we have a space that befits the wonderful character of the town. Some may mourn the loss of the brutalist architecture of the 1960s, but most local residents welcome the coming investment, and if anything, are frustrated it's taken so long to come around and may take a while yet to come to fruition. But that investment is a salient reminder that as sure as we are marking the past 70 years of Cumbernauld as a new town, the community continues to evolve, adapt and grow. We see investment in new schools, the funding coming from the Scottish Government, and again funding from the Scottish Government to help build much needed new social housing. We see new families coming to live in Cumbernauld, including the Syrian refugees who settled very happily and are now a vital part of our community coming to the town a decade ago. All of this is a welcome sign, Presiding Officer, that Cumbernauld Newtown isn't only here to stay, it's here to thrive, and it's to those who call Cumbernauld home I say many happy returns to our 70-year-old Newtown.
Thank you, Mr Hepburn. We now move to the open debate. I call Gordon MacDonald to be followed by Megan Gallagher. Mr MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I thank Jamie Hepburn for bringing forward this important debate to recognise Cumbernaulds 70th birthday. Many people will be aware that I was born in Glasgow, but not many, apart from Jamie Hepburn, know that I grew up in Cumbernauld from the age of 8 until I moved to Edinburgh in 1982. I attended Kildrum Primary School and Cumbernauld High School, and it's a sign of getting older when both those Newtown original school buildings have since been demolished. But coming from the centre of Glasgow to the first street built in the new town gave me at a young age a sense of freedom which I never had when surrounded by tenements, compared with the open fields and woodland glen of Cumbernauld. Education was an improvement on the composite classes we had in Glasgow, as the area I lived in was being demolished. In Cumbernauld, there was no private schools within easy commute, so everyone attended a local school, and it helped create that sense of community that exists today, as everyone, regardless of background, supported each other. And it will surprise some that I still have school friends that I am in contact with from those early days of Cumbernauld. Presiding Officer, the town has a significant history of recognition by the Saltire Society Housing Design Awards, especially in its early decades. Between 1961 and 1971, Cumbernauld won Saltire Society Awards for housing design in 8 out of 11 years, with 2 years seeing the town win 2 awards in a single year. These accolades were granted during a period of major innovation and experimentation in Scottish urban planning, with Cumbernauld often highlighted as a model for a new community design. But it was not all good news. Some of the first homes, especially in Kildrum, had flat roofs. Not a clever idea when those homes are placed at the top of a hill, prone to very wet, windy weather. Other blocks of flats were built of concrete and after a short lifespan were demolished because of damp. We left school or graduated from college or university, there was little work available in the town, resulting in many of my generation having to move across the UK to find employment, and that had an impact on the development of the town. Another was the local government reorganisation in 1996, which resulted in the absorption of Cumbernauld and Kilsyth District Council into North Lanarkshire Council. The result, many residents in the town believe, was that it was used as a cash cow for North Lanarkshire, and as a result, investment in the town declined. We had the first indoor shopping centre in the UK, but many residents missed the traditional town centre. It was also the first indoor shopping mall that had a song written about it by a local duo, the Edible Pair, called the Concrete Town Centre of Cumbernauld. With it being the first, it was also the prototype, with all the mistakes that go with building a groundbreaking centre that everyone else learns lessons from. The situation was not helped in 1997 when the UK government wound up the Development Corporation, resulting in the town centre being sold to more than one landlord. This was the start of the centre's decline, as no one had a clear plan or agreement to its future. Presiding Officer, despite those issues, Cumbernauld was a great place to grow up, and that first generation of new town dwellers appreciated the improvements in their living standards. Even though there was a lack of entertainment facilities in the town, people came together and a whole host of organisations was established. This brought the community closer together, and that same sense of its community still exists today and is something that should be celebrated as Cumbernauld reaches its 70th anniversary.
Thank you, Ms MacDonald. I call Megan Gallagher to be followed by Richard Leonard. Ms Gallagher.
Officer, and if I may also begin by thanking Jamie Hepburn for bringing this celebratory event to the Chamber today. 70 years, well, in planning terms, that's practically adolescence. But in Scottish political terms, it's several boundary reviews, a few economic cycles and at least one argument about whether the A80 was finished properly. But Cumbernauld, of course, was founded in 1955 as a bold experiment, a vision of post-war optimism designed to house Glasgow Overspill and create that forward-looking, pedestrian-friendly community. Now, opinions will differ whether the town centre looks like a modernist masterpiece or a crash-landed concrete spaceship, but nobody can deny the ambition or the personalities that reside in Cumbernauld. But Cumbernaulds achievements are far greater than its architectural quirks. It has produced remarkable people. You've got musicians like John Fratelli, actors, athletes, artists, and of course Jamie Hepburn mentioned a few of the local legends in Cumbernauld as well. That is, of course, the folk who can find their way out of the town centre on their first attempt. But Cumbernaulds' greatest strength is not concrete, it is community, and nowhere is that community more alive, more vibrant and more vital than in Cumbernauld Theatre. For decades, the Old and New Theatre has been the cultural heart of the town, a home for local drama, youth arts, live music, pantomimes, poetry and civic pride. It has nurtured talent, it's inspired generations and kept culture alive in the town. Yet today, this vital institution faces threat of closure. A funding package involving the Scottish Government, Creative Scotland and North Lanarkshire Council hangs in the balance. And without support, real practical financial support, the doors of this beloved theatre may close. Shutting Cumbernauld Theatre would not be an efficiency. I believe it would be an amputation within the town. It would silence one of Scotland's most community-centred cultural venues at the very moment we should be celebrating its contribution and investing in its future. A town built on bold ideas deserves better than to have its creative lifeline cut. And frankly, if a town centre that has been constructed and it's got a confusing landscape can survive 70 years, surely a theatre full of laughter, creativity and hope can survive funding shortages. So I hope that colleagues across parties, across councils, across agencies recognise the value of this cultural cornerstone. I think we all need to come together to ensure that Cumbernauld Theatre not only survives, but is able to thrive. And it's got to be a place where young people can discover confidence, where older residents can find community, and where everyone, regardless of their background, can come together and create something meaningful. Presiding Officer, as Cumbernauld celebrates its 70th year, I think today's debate will allow us to show the spirit of that new town. The spirit of optimism, innovation and sheer determination is still alive. Let us commit ourselves to safeguarding the theatre that embodies that spirit of Cumbernauld. Because in 50 years' time, when Cumbernauld marks its 120th anniversary, I want future generations, I apologise, Jamie Hepburn, not only to say, what's it called, but also proudly, that's the town that kept its culture alive. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Gallagher. I now call Richard Leonard to be followed by Claire Hawkey. Mr Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I thank Jamie Hepburn for lodging this motion, because it is right that this Parliament recognises that next Tuesday marks the 70 years to the day since Cumbernauld was designated as a new town under the Act of Parliament introduced by the visionary, the courageous, the socialist Labour government of 1945. It was an act founded on economic planning for full employment. It was an act which recognised that in pre-war Lanarkshire, almost half of the working class were employed in just 4 industries: coal mining, metal manufacture, shipbuilding and engineering. And so it was an act that demanded an economic plan for industrial diversification. It was an act as well with a founding principle to tackle the overcrowding and the slum housing which blighted cities like Glasgow. So it was an act with a social plan to tackle poverty, want, disease, to improve public health. Of course.
Jamie Hepburn.
I rise just to remind Mr Leonard he's quite right to talk about the challenges that existed in post-war industrial Lanarkshire, but of course Cumbernauld was at the time, and many people feel it still should be, part of Dunbartonshire.
Richard Leonard.
Well, that's a moot point, and I suspect I'm probably not well advised to get involved in that debate, especially with Mr Hepburn. But let me turn to the economic planning aspect of the Act of Parliament. Because between 1953 and 1978, when across Scotland as a whole there was a net decrease of 89,000 manufacturing jobs, across the 5 Scottish new towns, manufacturing employment rose by 32,000. Now, much of this was foreign direct investment. Too much of it was virulently anti-trade union electronics factories, which became increasingly characterised as assembly-only screwdriver plants, and characterised as well by mobile capital, which moved on. And in Cumbernauld, this meant Burroughs gone, OKI gone, Isola Verk gone. And it provided the background to some of my own formative experiences in the trade union movement, dealing with a hostile environment which was, of course, created by these multinational corporations, but a hostile environment that was encouraged by an unrepresentative, unaccountable and undemocratic Scottish office and its agencies. I also look back to the winding up of the new towns development corporations, which coincided with the abolition of an entire tier of local government, gerrymandered boundaries and the introduction of the poll tax. The winding up of new towns like Cumbernauld was more about securing financial returns to the Treasury, selling off more of the family's silver, asset stripping at knockdown prices, than it was about securing the long-term well-being of the Scottish economy. But through determined pressure from a community united, we managed to secure the transfer of the housing stock anyway to the newly established local authority, when the Tory government of the day wanted the stock and assets transferred to private landlords and commercial interests. Finally, I visited Cumbernauld Fire Station 2 weeks ago. The station was built in the 1970s. It has reinforced, autoclaved, aerated concrete, so it raises safety concerns. The firefighters I spoke to were promised a new station. Now instead, the new station is on hold and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service is threatening to remove an appliance and cut back the night shift. And I can't help but think that 70 years ago, that generation, still in the shadow of war, still saddled with wartime debts, had the vision to build an entire new town, and now we, our generation, we cannot even build a new bloody fire station. The great designer, socialist and architect William Morris said, apart from the desire to produce beautiful things, the leading passion of my life has been and is hatred of modern civilization. Well, I don't know what he would have made of Cumbernauld over the last 7 decades and its incarnation of modern civilization. But the people who live and work there, they are passionate. They deserve so much better. And it is our job to give them hope in place of despair. It is our job to celebrate the past, maybe mourn some of that past, certainly to remember the past. But it is also our job to offer them a better future, a future that they can believe in, like those generations who went before them 70 years ago.
Thank you, Ms Leonard. I call Claire Hockey to be followed by Paul Swinney. Ms Hockey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Colleagues, you may have seen so-called age tests on social media, apparently being able to explain the relationship between a cassette tape and a pencil firmly places you within a particular demographic. In the Central Belt, we have another. Pose the question, what's it called? And anyone around in the 80s will gleefully answer Cumbernauld. There was a time when you couldn't watch STV or open a newspaper without encountering the slogan, and it became deeply ingrained in our memories. So I hope that Jamie Hepburn will forgive me for getting it out of my system early in my speech. Cumbernaud's story is a fascinating part of our collective history, a modern internal mass migration designed to ease overpopulation, speed up regeneration and provide green space and clean air. As a story of mass movement and the formation of a new community, it is of course a complex one, sometimes a challenging one, but always an inspiring one. And as the town's 70th anniversary approaches, it's a great opportunity to reflect on that story, celebrate what makes the town special and to shape its future. And I know there are many various activities planned to mark and celebrate the milestone. And it's fair to assume that many Scottish towns and cities will be hosting celebrations next year, given the Scottish men's team have qualified for the World Cup for the first time since 1998. As we get caught up in a wave of nostalgia, TV channels will be clamouring to fill their schedules with football-related content, and no doubt we will get to enjoy Bill Forsyth's Gregory's Girl again. Although notionally set in a fictional town, it's clearly, unmistakably brought Cumbernauld to the big screens around the world. And shortly after providing the setting for this internationally acclaimed film, Cumbernauld produced a real-life football star. Ifeoma Diake, a talented defender with a long playing and coaching career. She started playing football at St Mary's Primary when she was 8 years old, later joining Cumbernauld Cosmos and Cumbernauld Ladies. And she received an incredible 123 caps for Scotland, became the first black woman to captain the team, and was part of the squad when Scotland's women qualified for their first ever major tournament, the Euros, in 2017. Her story, as well as the stories of countless other residents past and present, form part of the rich tapestry of the town today. And I would like to commend the organisations and volunteers who are not only involved in planning next year's celebrations, they're telling Cumbernauld stories, but also do great work to promote their town and support its people. Presiding Officer, as I wish Cumbernauld well for their anniversary, I cannot help but mention my hometown of Rutherglen, which I have the honour of representing. Next year, we celebrate an important anniversary, 900 years since Rutherglen was granted Royal Borough status. And like Cumbernauld, we are hosting events, exhibitions and community activities which our town is very much looking forward to and for which all the volunteers involved in the Rutherglen 900 project should be commended. A year-round celebration of Rutherglen's people, its history and, importantly, its future is being planned. And the event programme kicks off in Rutherglen's iconic Town Hall next month, an event I'm very much looking forward to. Presiding Officer, in concluding, I would like to thank Jamie Hepburn for bringing this debate to Chamber. I wish all those who live and work in Cumbernauld the best for their 70th anniversary and for the future of their town.
Thank you, Ms Hockey. I call Paul Swinney to be followed by Bob Doris. Mr Swinney.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I commend Mr Hepburn, the member for Cumbernauld and Kilsyth, for successfully securing this motion for members' business, which I was pleased to support. And I commend his excellent speech celebrating the new town of Cumbernauld. New in the sense that relative to its bigger brother Glasgow, which is celebrating its 850th anniversary this year, there is nonetheless a symbiotic relationship between the two places, because Cumbernauld, as we note today, as a new town, was largely born of a post-war goal to redistribute or disperse 550,000 people from Glasgow to new towns across Scotland. Certainly visionary and ambitious in its scale of addressing some of the severe issues caused by the rapid industrialisation of Glasgow in the previous century. One which has had many positive aspects, but one which has also had many challenging aspects. And if we take a view of the history of it and the round, as was alluded to by my colleague Mr Leonard, in terms of industrial development, in terms of population dispersal, it is a mixed story of success for Scotland, and we can learn some of the lessons from that. And I think the point that was observed about the Development Corporation being an excellent vehicle for economic development being a key one, and its dismantling in the mid-1990s has been a regrettable situation. Both the regional councils and the development corporations are sorely missed, I think, in Scotland's landscape today. And we can test that issue with the only remaining development corporation in the country, which is Clyde Gateway, proving to be quite successful at driving investment in the east end of Glasgow. We could do with more of those types of organisations in our country today. Happy to give way.
Claire Hockey.
I thank Paul Swinney for taking my intervention, and I'm very grateful that he's raised the issue of Clyde Gateway. It also covers part of the Rutherglen constituency.
Paul Swinney.
It certainly covers a swathe of Greater Glasgow, including Rutherglen, and I think it's important to note that. I mean, if I think of Cumbernauld, I suppose my earliest perception of it was going to the town centre, this mega structure, which was fascinating to a young kid, but built in one of the world's first mega structures, built in 1963. Alongside the coherent plan for the town, but also watching Gregory's Girl as a young boy, the 1981 Bill Forsyth film, which really captured the spirit of optimism around Cumbernauld, a young town with young people and a lot of aspiration, and certainly contrasted with the older inner city of Glasgow. And I think it's important to recognise that whilst there was a lot of optimism, new industries, new housing, there were consequences for that as well. There was a report around 10 years ago published by the Glasgow Centre for Population Health, History, Politics and Vulnerability, explaining excess mortality, which highlighted that the poor coherence of urban planning decisions through the 60s, 70s and 80s, and a democratic deficit or a lack of ability to control decisions are among the reasons why Glaswegians today have particularly premature death rates. And one of the observations by Chick Collins, who authored the report, was that the effect of the new towns, inadvertently, admittedly, was to steer economic investment away from Glasgow and to redeploy population out of the city and to divert new investments in industry to peripheral estates and to peripheral new towns. So I think it's important if we take stock of the story of Greater Glasgow and its evolution over the last half-century or so. We need to think about economies of agglomeration, and I think it's interesting that there's this new agenda about city regions and considering the economics of a city region. How do we improve the transport links across it? How can we improve the spatial integration? And how can we improve economic justice across the region? And I think that's something we can take stock on. Cumbernauld was certainly a visionary project, and it's one that has great success. But we should also be aware that it left behind communities in the wider region, particularly in inner city Glasgow, where the old, the very poor and the almost unemployable, and according to that report, were left behind accentuating and concentrating deprivation and poverty to an extent that is unknown elsewhere in the UK. So I think we need to consider learning from the transient investments of the foreign direct investments through the Silicon Glen, through the redispersal of population from Glasgow. How do we rebuild a city region that can be truly world-leading again? But I commend Cumbernauld on its big milestone, 70 years, and here's to the next 70 as part of a greater Glasgow city region that can really punch above its weight with all parts of it succeeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Swinney. And I call Bob Doris. Mr Doris.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to speak in Jamie Hepburn's members' debate celebrating this significant landmark, the 70th anniversary of the establishment of the new town of Cumbernauld. I commend Mr Hepburn for bringing this motion to the Scottish Parliament this afternoon. In doing so, I can also thank Jamie Hepburn for his kind words when responding to my members' debate just a few months ago, which celebrated the 50th anniversary of the establishment of Summerston in my constituency. And I hope the member will forgive me that I might just return to that fleetingly later on. It is right that we celebrate such civic and community landmark occasions. I cannot claim to have much experience of Cumbernauld, but I do know that the area has a proud history which stretches way back beyond the 70 years, and that the formation of the new town, which incorporated historic villages such as Cumbernauld itself and indeed Cumbernauld with its own proud history. My initial reference point for Cumbernauld was, for many people, as mentioned before, is Gregory's Girl. People were mentioning things I still can't count without putting 1 elephant, 2 elephant, 3 elephant into my timing, or I still want to visit Caracas, or indeed say Bella Bella for no apparent reason. The point I merely make is that the film defined a period of time, and Cumbernauld also defined that period in time, is the point I suppose I'm trying to make. However, my first direct contact with Cumbernauld goes back some 30 years, where on occasions, as a much younger man, I used to stay at a friend's house in Cumbernauld after the night out in Glasgow. That was because Cumbernauld had a late-night bus service from Glasgow, unlike the Vale of Leven, where I grew up. And perhaps Jamie Hepburn can comment today on what the late-night links between Glasgow city centre and Cumbernauld are for those late-night revellers. Decades since I've partaken in that, I have to say, Mr Hepburn. I'm afraid I feel I must.
Jamie Hepburn.
All I would say is they could be much better, but of course that's why we welcome the work that SPT are undertaking in improving bus services using the powers that the Scottish Government put in place through the Transport Scotland Act 2019.
Mr Doris.
I thank the member whose debate this is in making that intervention. I know it doesn't spark interventions for elsewhere in the chamber. I should just point that out. I would not intend taking them at this point. During the time where I would have occasional visits to Cumbernauld under the hospitality of my friend's parents, I recall visiting Cumbernauld, whose history stretches many years past the establishment of Cumbernauld town, new town itself. Cumbernauld itself has a proud weaving heritage and was also the birthplace of the 19th century revolutionary John Baird, a leading participant and radical commander in the Radical War of 1820. He was subsequently executed and became known as one of the 1820 martyrs. On researching that aspect, I was reminded that on the 10th of August 1835, an absolute pardon was granted to Baird and to the 4 local weavers who had also been convicted and sentenced to transportation to the penal colonies. Such was the outrage of communities. I also understand that in 2011 a memorial wall was erected in the village commemorating 3 groups of local people. First, those executed or sentenced to transportation for participating in the Radical War, and to 6 local men who were killed alongside 41 others in the Auchingaich mine disaster of 1959. And for all those local people who had lost their lives in conflict throughout the world, a real symbol of solidarity internationally. Now, I want to go back to the date that was 2011, way after the formation of the new town of Cumbernauld, looking way back to hundreds of years before the formation of that new town itself, a lineage and a history stretching over time, way beyond the 70 years we're celebrating here today. I also note that the remains of John Baird and fellow 1820 martyr Andrew Hardy were moved to Sighthill Cemetery in my constituency in 1847, and the location is today marked by an impressive monument erected in their honour. Now, in the short time that I don't really have left, Presiding Officer, let me just say that the 50th anniversary of Summerston has went incredibly well, with a wonderful summer gala. We're about to have an amazing Christmas fair. Summerston loves Christmas. And finally, one of the women behind pulling all of this together. Wilma Mather from the Somerset Community Environmental Group was recognised just the other day in Glasgow City Chambers, where she won the Evening Times Community Champion Seniors Award. I suspect there are many community champions right across Cumbernauld today and over the last 70 years and beyond, and my happy birthday is extended to everyone with connections today and years gone by from Cumbernauld.
Thank you, Mr Doris. And I now call on Minister Ivan McKee to respond to the debate. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm delighted to take this opportunity to share my congratulations to the people of Cumbernauld on this important milestone in the town's history, on the 70th anniversary of its designation as a new town. And I thank very much Jamie Hepburn for bringing forward this debate this afternoon. I think everyone knows the passion that he exhibits for the town of Cumbernauld, and I've been delighted to be his guest on a number of occasions in the town at various events. It's also been a really interesting debate, and different members have taken different perspectives on what Cumbernauld means to them and its wider significance. One of those debates where you indeed learn quite a number of things that you weren't already aware of, and of course members taking the opportunity to mention their own local towns as well. Cumbernauld, of course, is one of 5 planned new towns that were developed across Scotland's central belt in the post-war period, designated under the New Towns Act 1946 to help deliver housing, support slum clearances from Glasgow, and provide housing for that overspill, and of course also to provide that economic stimulus that has been mentioned by a number of members. Many have celebrated the distinctive character and identity of Cumbernauld over the years, and it's been recognised for its sense of community and its commitment to renewal. We've learned a lot from the success of our new towns, not least the benefits of a clear vision and the need for the public sector and delivery partners to drive forward development. Our places, of course, are ever-changing, and today we're still working on the delivery of new homes and communities, and we continue to build at scale. A number of new settlements are being created currently across Scotland, from Tornagrain near Inverness, Chapelton in Aberdeenshire, Winchborough in West Lothian and Blindwells in East Lothian. And as well as creating new communities, we continue to regenerate existing places, for example, by steering development towards vacant and derelict land. There is much that our new towns and regenerated places can learn from the previous generation of new towns. On the subject of our many and varied towns, I'm pleased that we have helped fund the development and refresh of Understanding Scottish Places, which launched last week. This is an instrumental tool in supporting local government, businesses and communities to inform planning and investment decisions to improve Scotland's places, and also some fascinating data on a number of towns across Scotland, including, of course, Cumbernauld. Towns like Cumbernauld and their town centres play a vital role in improving people's economic, social and environmental well-being. And in signing up to the Town Centre First principle, in collaboration with COSLA and council leaders, we must put the health of town centres at the heart of decision-making. Cumbernauld, of course, has a unique town centre which was originally designed for the motor age and has been the subject of much debate. Books, I believe, have been written about it, and it's been even reported to attract international visitors. I know that North Lanarkshire Council is working hard to regenerate the town centre to build new education, health, leisure and community facilities. Of course, town planners and architects might like to think that new towns are their creation, and of course they did play an important role, and Jamie Hepburn gave us some of the history of the events that took place prior to the building of the new town at Cumbernauld. But of course, in reality, it's the people that live there that are central to the success. As the contributions to this debate have shown, a town is about much more than bricks and mortar, and it's people that make a place feel like home. There are many inspiring examples of organisations in Cumbernauld working with and for their communities to bring people together and create a real sense of community. As the Scottish Government, since 2014, we've invested over £52 million capital funding to support North Lanarkshire Council in collaboration with local businesses and communities to deliver key regeneration projects, including £4 million regeneration capital grant fund investment towards the Cumbernauld Community Enterprise Centre, which has created a strong presence within the town centre, creating new jobs, training opportunities and stimulating further economic activity. We also, as Scottish Government, provided over £325 of our Investing in Communities Fund over 3 years to the Cumbernauld and Carbrain Community Hub. This vibrant community hub works directly with people to provide an open, welcome and accessible place where the whole community can come together, providing community food pantry, mental health support groups and employability workshops, and bringing approximately 10,000 residents per year, reducing poverty and isolation and building stronger community cohesion. Indeed, I will.
Jamie Hepburn.
Just on that point, I wonder if you would join me in thanking the Cumbernauld Carbrain Community Hub for hosting the presiding officer's 25th anniversary of this place tour around the country. They very kindly arranged the hosting of the Central Scotland leg of that tour when it was held in Cumbernauld.
Minister.
I'm delighted to congratulate the Hub on that work that they've taken forward, and it's absolutely clear that Cumbernauld is a vibrant community with people working together to support each other. Many other charities and voluntary organisations offering a range of services, including Cumbernauld Wheels for Wellbeing, which helps people to access to healthcare, and Cumbernauld Community Mental Health Hub, which works to improve wellbeing and overcome health inequalities. And the Cornerstone House Centre is a social enterprise which works very hard to benefit local people in a wide range of ways, whether that be family services, employability, health, or just providing a place for people to gather together. I'm sure there are many other great projects and organisations that I can't cover in such a short speech, but members today have highlighted some fantastic initiatives that we would all want to commend and celebrate. As we've heard today, there is a lot going on in Cumbernauld. There is much to celebrate about the resilience and community spirit of the people of Cumbernauld who have worked together to ensure it's a great place to live and work. So I congratulate the community on their efforts, their strong sense of identity and their commitment to supporting one another, and join with all members, I'm sure, to wish them a very happy 70th anniversary. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate, and I suspend this meeting until 2:30 p.m. Thank you.
central bank, the majority of an estimated 260 billion in sovereign Russian assets held in the West. My view is that the full seizure of Russian assets is clearly proportional to the crimes committed by the Russian state against Ukraine, and any post-war settlement will incur huge reparations, so the seizure of assets are paying forward a long tradition of post-war reparations. I welcome the news yesterday that the European Commission plans to move forward quickly with the reparation loans to Ukraine using frozen